Chuck and I are excited to spend the next 25 or so minutes with you and give you an overview of what we're doing at Wellntel and what we're where we're going. So I'm Marion. I'm one of the co-founders. I am the non-technical person. Chuck can answer all technical questions and any other questions as our VP of hydrology. Chuck, you want to say hi, and then we'll just jump in and tag team.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Marion always sells herself short on the technical side. She's got it all in hand. So looking forward to being with you here for this brief time.
Great. Okay. Goal from the very beginning with Wellntel is to be scalable and affordable in answering groundwater information needs. So we'll start a little bit back, a little more than 10 years ago when we first went down the path of creating Wellntel. Our focus as a couple of co-founders who did not come from a hydrology background, but had really stumbled in a consulting project that we had done. They had done upon groundwater and learned about its importance, its ubiquity, but also the stress that it was under. So no surprises to anybody in this group. Groundwater, the essentialness of groundwater, that increasing use for many reasons, changing climate patterns, changing population centers, and changing use and industrialization is changing the resource itself, and the pace of monitoring has lagged that change, mainly because it's a little bit complex and a little more expensive than would make it easy to adopt. So what we wanted to do to change that is to create really an end-to-end solution that provides real-time groundwater insight, and then smooths out the process of getting that data and transmitting that data and sharing that data. So our thinking in creating Wellntel, we thought to ourselves, we're going to make sure that we take advantage of existing assets. We want to simplify that data collection and management, and then just really streamline on reporting and sharing of data. The starting point for the Wellntel information system is around a sensor, and that taking advantage of existing assets. What we found in the work that we did to understand this space was that there's, give or take in the US here, about 16 million private wells, give or take. About 15 million of them are domestic wells or farm or industry submersible pump wells. And so that gave us an interesting place to start, because while there are some things going on at the top of a well, there is a nice gap until you hit that water level underneath, and the pump is underneath the water level. So what we did is we created a sensor that takes advantage of both this existing well and also really an existing infrastructure. So this is a typical well seal that you'd find anywhere in a southern location. Usually has a 1/2 inch MPT additional port that was used for maybe taking tape measurements, or maybe just has a little plug in it. We created a sensor that is maybe about 9 inches, about the size of a blender, that uses plumbing adaptations to lift itself out of the busyness or away from the busyness of the top of a well seal, and uses an acoustic signal to read the water level. And basically how that works is little sound signals made here in the sensor. It goes down into the well, bumps up against water level. The signal comes back again, and all of the information including, reflections off of water pipes and bundles of wire and all that sort of stuff is all collected with a microphone that hangs maybe 3 to 4 inches underneath that well seal. So nothing going into the water, nothing interrupting operations. And then that microphone scoops up all that information and uses a radio to send data to the cloud, and I'll explain how that works. As I said, it uses an existing port if you are in the north, or someplace that uses well caps instead of well seals. It's simply a matter of tapping a 1/2 inch MPT port. Because it is at the top of a well, and doesn't have to touch water. There's no lifting of the pump. There's no lifting of really anything. So it installs in less than an hour, and fits on a 2 inch monitoring well up to an 18 inch production well. It uses a digital signal. There is no drift. It doesn't depend on an outside variable like pressure to calibrate, and that means that the signal is consistent once it's locked in. Power source wise, we can do just about anything: solar, line power if it's available, or battery power. And as I said, it works on monitoring wells as well. It was just designed to take advantage of production wells. So here's 3 pictures of the sensor in the wild, out in the field. This first picture is a small water utility outside in Texas, outside of Austin. You can see that plumbing adaptation sort of lifting up around things that are happening. Center one is a vineyard in Northern California, Sonoma Napa area. Third one is a water bottling plant in South Carolina. All of them, different applications, different sort of setups, but a similar outcome in that we're monitoring on existing production wells. In terms of that telemetry, that radio, this was an important thing for us to make sure that we got right, because we know that driving around to download transducers or to take manual measurements is an expense and a time consumer. So what we did is, our sensor has a radio in it, and there is a corresponding radio that is placed on a little communications gateway. You can think of it's little, almost like a little brick, 5 inches by 5 inches by maybe an inch and a half. That communications gateway plugs into a router, which could be somebody's broadband router, could be a Starlink router, sort of, if you have satellite, lots of different routers, as long as there's an Ethernet port. And the idea is that the sensor takes readings, transmits them using 916 megahertz radio frequency, and then the gateway pushes data on up to the cloud. It doesn't go into anybody's network. We don't know any passwords. It essentially, rides that internet connection like a highway on up to our cloud. And as long as the sensor and the gateway are within about 1/3 of a mile of one another, and decent line of sight, doesn't have to be exact line of sight, just without a hill between the two of them, the data can flow on up to the cloud, and actually, commands can flow back down again in a duplex way. If the sensor happens to be, not around a router, and in a remote location, we can always connect it to a cell modem. We have solar or line power based options where the gateway and the cell modem can be powered and data can flow up to the cloud. Because we're monitoring on production wells, there's a whole bunch of additional data that gets collected. A regular, monitoring well, sorry, little brain phase there. A regular monitoring well, will have, be nice and quiet. And a production well isn't always nice and quiet. So what we wanted to do was make sure that both pumping information were available as well as non-pumping related information available. And the way that we did that is we add a little current transducer, which is essentially a couple cables that connect to the sensor, and a donut that clamps around one of the power wires down to the pump, and it will function to sense power, the presence of power or not. And with that information, it tags readings so that they can be looked at in full or filtered out. So over here on the left-hand side, you can see production well, all the readings. There's timed readings, there's pump start readings, pump stop readings, recovery. The once the pump stops, the sensor will take a volley of recovery readings until it gets the water level gets back to the original time reading beforehand. But you can also, because they're tagged, you can also take all of that pumping related information out and just look at the timed readings and really get a better understanding for trends over time. So it is designed to really provide as much information as possible while taking advantage of a different type of well. So you can deploy one Wellntel sensor as a sentinel, say, by itself next to an area of concern, or you can deploy many of them across an area to start to do the type of work like you see here, where you're contouring and looking at change over time across an area. To continue on that simplification, we do operationally, we provide status reports on a weekly basis on our sensor. So folks know beforehand if a battery is starting to fail, or if a sensor gateway, for example, go offline. And then you can plan field time in a much more optimized way. We had, for example, during the Los Angeles fires, there was a tremendous amount of winds in Southern California, and not even related to the fires, but there was a lot of outage of both power and broadband. Gateways popped offline and popped back online, and most of the time sensors came back online and were reporting in real time. So it's really designed to be resilient and and keep on going and minimize those data gaps. There's also, if there's interest, programmable threshold alerts around, for example, water level drawdown in a sentinel well, or water level drawdown on average across an area or a group of wells that are changing. The second part of our goal is to simplify data collection, and as I've just talked about, but then also management. So we've initially had a database that was focused on us. We realized quickly that Wellntel data is not the only data that's important to folks who look at groundwater data. So we have another database that is centralized and sensor agnostic. So we can take in any sensor measurement from groundwater, our systems, but pressure transducers, manual measurements, surface water, rain, and any of the above. And you can bring it in as a CSV upload or a spreadsheet upload, one measurement at a time, an API connection in, or an API connection back out again, and then SCADA if that is of interest. And then while you are in our dashboard, which is designed for a quick understanding and to see data, but also very easy to download, or API data elsewhere for models, etc. In the dashboard, on our dashboard, you can also bring in data from the USGS, National Groundwater Monitoring Network, NOAA's Precipitation Network, and some state networks to be able to have greater context around the data that you are seeing. I'm going to let Chuck talk about this. This is basically an example of the power of being able to combine data into one place for some new insight.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. So this is a hydrograph providing an example of historical data. This happens to be a water supply, public supply well in Texas, east of Austin. And you can see the very first data point up there, water depth was higher than 50 feet. That was level when the well was drilled. And then there was some 20 years before the next reading was taken, but you can see over time this very clear lowering of the water level based on these semi-annual annual tape downs. So there's this long 60-year history of tape downs, which are very clearly. And then we, in 2018, working with the Groundwater Conservation District where this well was located, we added a Wellntel system. And the system, as you can see, is bringing in a lot of additional information here, showing the spread of data vertically. That's the pumping information. So you have a sense now, something that they never saw before, which was the depth of drawdown for pumping events. And so you can see that clearly. And as Marion demonstrated before, because these data are tagged, we can essentially separate out all the data that are related to pumping and see just the static, the non-pumping levels through time. And a couple of things here on this image, you can see that they've continued to take sort of annual tape downs, and nice confirmation between the tape downs and the continuous data collected by the Wellntel sensor. And you see that the decline continues, but you have now much more insight into the seasonal changes that are sort of the detail around that sort of long-term gradual decline. So it's a real sort of another level of information for the operations and sort of the foresight and planning for this particular community supply well.
Thanks, Chuck. So this is just a screenshot of our dashboard. There's 5 or 6 standard analytics that we can do. There's lots of control that someone who's taking a look at this can decide how much or how little information they want to take a look at. This happens to be 3 wells in a network that are probably all within sort of 15, 20 miles of each other, but have very different reactions to changing conditions over 4 or 5 years based on just the geology and their alluvial or not nature. So the last part of what we want to do is make sure that data sharing and engagement around data could be made easier. So as I've said before, we do a lot of APIing of data both in and then back out again. This happens to be for Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. We are APIing data. Well, they have actually designed what they want to bring from our system on into the GSA's website. We've also, and this is an example from Texas, created dashboards of information that are in real time, but they're curated in a way to allow, in this case, a conservation district in Texas to share information about monitoring areas in their district, but also to provide it in a way that is secure and private. So what they've done here is they've created monitoring areas. Each area has 5 or 6 select sentinel wells, and you can click on and each one of these dots, which is about a geofuzzy center to that monitoring area, and get information about how this area is changing. Community engagement wise, this can also be done in another way. This is another conservation district in Texas. We've embedded little charts in their website that are updated on a real-time basis that can show the current water year, 1 year, and then also a period of record to be able to share with the community so that they understand how things are changing, kind of put any kind of policy changes into perspective. And then there is always our secondary dashboard, which is really the Well Volunteers dashboard. If if you have folks who raise their hand and say, yes, you can monitor my well, you can provide them with their own secure login to be able to see their data in their well, and also set their own alerts if they choose to do that.
This is, as it says here, this is a dairy farm in Wisconsin, not just any dairy farm, it's a CAFO, so it's a concentrated animal feeding operation. This particular farm has about 5,000 head of cattle. As you can see, the quote at the bottom says you can't have water hauled in for 5,000 cows. And if you don't have the well water, you can't cool the milk, so cooling is important. And you also need the water for all of those activities. As Marion listed there, hygiene, cooling, and hydration. So what we're showing here is a hydrograph. In this particular case, there are 3 wells that are supplying this large dairy operation, and they rotate, they take their turns in pumping. And you can see here, this is a hydrograph over just about a week's worth of time. And the different colors are the different wells. And all those changes that you see in the wells, those are all related to pumping events. So the whole pump start, pump stop, the recoveries are all captured and labeled in there. And if you, the thing you would like you to come away from this is that that when a well has the responsibility for pumping, but it rests during certain parts of its operation. So one of the really wonderful aspects of this, the monitoring at this farm, is that not only is there operational insight for the people who are having to manage these wells, but we're starting to see some really insight into the aquifer properties, just because of seeing the influence of pumping of one well on the other. And this rolls all the way up to the Wisconsin DNR, who is really loving this information, understanding specific capacity and the influence on this aquifer. So as the permitting requirements around all of that.
I'll just quickly walk through. I mentioned Yolo County before. They have the flood control and water conservation group had 14 domestic wells that they manually monitored monthly. They were looking to minimize both field and data storage and transmission costs. And so we started working with them in 2018. This chart that I showed earlier happens to be an example from their dashboard, and a very alluvial based well and some not so. And then they also take advantage of being able to share wells with well information with well owners. Budget wise, just really quick, you can think about Wellntel as about $1,500 per sensor, gateway, plumbing adaptation system. So in this example, we've got 5 of them. The data is a couple $100 per well, and it includes data transmission, storage, APIs to other places, and then we've included in here us, having our team come in and do an installation, which is completely optional. If you were going to put Wellntel in the middle of nowhere and wanted it to be real time, base stations can run you anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, depending on the power that's available. And replacement parts are always, batteries are little, that little microphone cable will occasionally need to be replaced as well. We are monitoring across the United States. We just in the last year have started in Greece and Mexico, although it's international, so it's a little nerve-wracking right now. But we're coast to coast in our coverage, and I'm going to leave it at that.